From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our television and radio audiences worldwide, I'm David Weston. Welcome to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. President Trump is set to speak from the East Room of the White House any moment right now. We are watching that carefully. We'll bring that to you as soon as it happens. The president teased these remarks as a discussion of what he called the country's victory after the Senate voted to acquit him of 2 articles of impeachment, one for abuse of power and the other for obstruction of Congress. Joining us now with more analysis while we wait for these remarks is Bloomberg contributor Rick Davis, former presidential campaign manager for Senator John McCain. So we're waiting for the president right now. He says it's a victory for the country. I suspect this might be settling some scores, perhaps?
A little score settling today, a little pumping up for the future. Look, he had a lot at stake. It was a tough month. The Congress put him through a lot, really split vote. If it hadn't been for party line, he would have had bigger problems. Mitt Romney, the senator from Utah, the only defection from the Republican ranks, rankled him quite a bit, at which he actually brought that up at the prayer breakfast this morning. So there is a day of recriminations probably set for us.
Well, one of the things we can look forward to is the possibility he might refer to Mitt Romney, Senator Romney, actually, because he did talk about the prayer breakfast. Mitt Romney, of course, in his remarks said, I had no choice. I took an oath to God. I had to follow through, and there was no advantage for me in doing this. The president took issue with that.
Yeah, he said, don't use faith as an excuse for doing the wrong thing. Right. Anybody who voted against him is going to have been doing the wrong thing. By definition, President Trump doesn't allow any leakage of his image. He hones it very tightly. And so impeachment is going to be on his record now, for the rest of his life. And he doesn't appreciate that. As
we're watching members of the staff come into the East Wing in the White House, we'll bring you that as soon as it happens. I wonder, though, Rick, whether we might project, and we'll find out in a short time, from the State of the Union what we might see here. Because in the State of the Union, he did not really hold out much of a hand to the Democrats.
Oh, it was not a bipartisan attempt. If anything, it was sort of a State of the Union, a look back, attacking the Obama administration for their failed policies on unemployment and taxes and the economy, and taking credit for everything that's been positive in that regard. And then a look to the future campaign, not to the future of our country. And so the themes that he espoused on immigration and on health care were all things that were poll tested and ready to go for his presidential reelection.
And he was not at all shy about condemning the failed policies of his predecessor in various respects.
Oh, he went right after Barack Obama many times.
Exactly. And the socialism of American medicine, going after some of the people in that chamber at that time.
In the chamber at that time, and one of them will likely be on the ballot against him, and you can expect to hear a lot more of that.
So how much of this, what we're seeing right now, is his administration, and how much of it is the campaign? How much of this is really a campaign address?
Well, arguably, President Trump started campaigning literally the day after his inauguration. So you can't really divorce him from campaigns. It's probably what he likes to do most. And so every day of this presidency has basically been a campaign.
Yeah, I'd even suggest maybe even the day of the inauguration, because you remember the inauguration speech was so dark, so gloomy about how bad the country was. And then when we saw the State of the Union address earlier this week, it was, look at how far we've come, because it was so awful when I got inaugurated, and look where it is now.
Sure, set up the failure, right? The message is nothing is going right, and only I can fix it. That's certainly the message that he gave to everybody at the State of the Union on Tuesday.
Okay, we're going to continue to wait for the president to give his address. It was scheduled at noon. He's a couple minutes late. But while he's a couple minutes late, let's check in quickly on what's going on with the markets right now with Abigail Doolittle's. Where are we today, Abigail?
Well, we certainly have a rally once again, more modest gains than we've had earlier this week. But who knew a week ago that we would be looking at record highs for the Dow, the S&P 500, and the NASDAQ? So those coronavirus fears really are racing. And yesterday you were asking about earnings, which have been shadowed quite a bit by those macro concerns. But today, that's one of the big drivers. Twitter's up about 17%, and this is driving the communication sector higher. They put up a very strong quarter. We also have the staples sector as the second best, up about 0.6%. Philip Morris doing well. They raised their profit outlook. So today, earnings are a little bit more front and center.
And earlier in the day, it was thought that perhaps the announcement from China, they would cut those tariffs in half on, I think, $75 billion worth of goods, were really helping the equity markets. But the bonds were also being bought. So I wonder if the bond traders have a little bit different view about the optimism than the equity traders.
Well, bonds Inverse to stocks. So stocks have been in a big rally mode this week. Bonds this week have been pulling back. So that little bit of mixed movement that you see for bonds could just be some of those traders saying, wait, the stock move is huge. We've been selling off bonds right now, but maybe it makes sense to hedge a little bit. So not a lot of movement there. Yes. And that, of course, would speak to the uncertainty that we still do have around the coronavirus, even though stock investors this week choosing to look at the more optimistic view.
Yeah, the one thing we know for sure is it isn't over yet when it comes to coronavirus. We got a ways to go.
Yes, lots of information probably still to come.
Okay, thanks so much to Abigail Doolittle for that check on the markets. We continue to wait now for the President of the United States, Donald Trump, to appear in the East Wing of the White House to give his remarks on what he calls a nation's victory, responding to the impeachment yesterday. So the impeachment yesterday, it was basically along party lines. You mentioned that we had the Mitt Romney thing. Did the Democrats regret having done this?
You know, look, Nancy Pelosi did not want to enter into an impeachment process in the House. She made it very clear throughout the entire year last year that this was not something she thought was going to end well, and she was right. It did not end well for the Democrats. They weren't able to make the case to get any real Republican softness in the vote, and so I think net, I mean, when you see some of the polls reporting that this may be the high water mark in his administration for President Trump, you have to argue that it hasn't hurt him and maybe even helped him.
Well, that's the question. Did it help him? Maybe it did, because now you can say, look, they tried me, they acquitted me.
Well, there is a lot more going on than just impeachment, right? You have a very healthy economic environment that is bolstering a lot of people's way of life, and that seems to be continuing. The rally you just described has been very optimistic for people. So whether it's the bright economy that we're currently experiencing, relative peace around the world right now, there's no real conflict. Foreign policy, national security has come off the front page. These things all would inure to the benefit of a sitting president. We're just used to not having Donald Trump take advantage of any of these positive things. But I think he's blown through impeachment, and we'll see where he goes from here. Okay,
once again, we are waiting for President Trump. He was due to speak in the East Wing of the White House at 12 o'clock. He's somewhat delayed. Staying with me here will be Rick Davis. And a programming note now, we're going to have coverage of the New Hampshire primary. That's coming up Tuesday, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio. I'm David Weston. President Trump is set to speak from the East Room of the White House any moment from right now. It appears that they've gathered all the people there. They're getting quiet, so we anticipate he'll come out any moment. We'll bring you that as soon as it happens. In the meantime, I am joined here by Bloomberg contributor Rick Davis. So what is his political team telling him at this point? The Democrats, I assume, want to move beyond impeachment. Is it going to help him to come back to it?
Sure. I think he wants to put a historical exclamation point behind the impeachment proceedings from yesterday. He wants to set the record straight. I didn't do anything wrong. He's going to want to go after the Democrats as persecuting him since day one of his administration. And I think he just wants to put a reference point in the history books that this was all a partisan effort on the part of the Democrats and that he actually didn't do anything wrong. So, I mean, we'll let the public decide. They got the facts. They know what's going on. But I definitely think he wants to pivot away from this and put it in his own context.
Rick, I'm curious, coming from somebody who has run so many political campaigns, there was a time at least some people thought that the way you won a campaign is you tried to appeal to some of the people in the center, or at least toward the center, bring them over. Are those days gone? I mean, is it more a matter of just getting out your base? And if you alienate people in the center, much less the people on the other side, it doesn't bother you too much?
Well, in the old sort of style strategy around politics, you went to the polls to gather up the activists and the people who are really committed in primaries and caucuses and conventions. And so you have to go a little bit more further right in the Republican side and for the left on the Democratic side in order to get that energy from the party, win the nominations from the left and the right, and then move to the center to gravitate toward a larger coalition for the general election. These days, though, because of polarization, there are so few people who actually are undecided anymore in American politics that kind of movement from the left and the right into the center is not as popular today in politics as it was.
So what does that tell us, if anything, about the Democratic side right now? And from President Trump's point of view, does that suggest he'd rather not run against a Bernie Sanders because Bernie Sanders is like him in some respects, really appealing to a poll, or would he be more threatened by a Biden or a Buttigieg who might be more in the center?
You know, it's interesting. I think Trump has one thing going for him. His base is just incredibly loyal to him, right? And he thinks he can win with that base. In other words, he thinks he can drive the numbers down with the Democrats so that they don't turn out as much as he needs them to, so that he can actually use his base to win elections. That's how he won in 2016. So he really doesn't care at the end of the day who the Democrat is that he's going to run against. What he cares about is what do we have on them and how hard can we beat them down.
One thing he will not have going for him in 2020, he did in 2016, is people underestimating him. I mean, to what extent was he able to suppress some of that vote for Hillary Clinton because people were just asleep at the switch and they really didn't think he was going to get elected and they didn't come out? The Democrats this time are certainly going to make their people think, boy, you got to show up.
Yeah, he will not be underestimated again. And so I think you can see this now in the tenor of the Democrats. A lot of the primary conversation is all about electability. Who can we nominate who can beat Donald Trump or have the best chance of beating Donald Trump? And so I do think there's an awakening by the Democrats. I don't think they're going to see this moment pass again. And I think that that will be seen more in the primary cycle, like in New Hampshire, than that organizational contest that we just witnessed in Iowa.
President Trump prevailed specifically in the Electoral College by a relatively small number
Only
of votes.
in the Electoral College.
Well, that's right.
He actually got beat by Hillary Clinton.
That's right,
in the popular
vote. But it was a fairly small number of voters in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania. Is that a vulnerability for him? Because from the Democrat side, we say, oh, what we really need to do is just turn around. And it was a matter of tens of thousands of votes.
Yeah, David, you're exactly right. He won 3 electoral states, 10,000, 15,000, 18,000 votes. And that is a tiny fraction of the vote compared to the overall vote in those states. The key thing that people don't really pay much attention to is that Hillary Clinton dramatically underperformed Barack Obama's previous 2 elections in those states. And even though President Trump underperformed Mitt Romney's performance in those states, he did it by such a small amount that he was able to actually beat Hillary even against the base that was much larger in the Obama elections. So if the Democrats can turn out their vote and Trump replicates the vote that he got in 2016, he doesn't stand a chance in those states.
Does the midterm election tell us anything? Or for that matter, some of the elections we've had already this year where we had some people that were typically in red states that actually elected some Democrats?
Yeah, in 2016, the president lost the popular vote by 3 million by Hillary Clinton, and we talked about that. He was able to thread the eye of the needle with electoral votes. In 2018, the midterm elections, Democrats had 9 million more votes than Republicans did. So when you start spreading the field that thin, there's going to be a highly unlikely chance that Republicans can find electoral votes by losing by 9 million or more. So the question is going to be, can the Democrats hold that coalition of voters together who overwhelmingly gave them victories in 40 different congressional seats last November and November of 18, and can they do it again this cycle?
For our television and radio audience, we are waiting for the President of the United States, Donald Trump, to appear in the East Room of the White House to give his remarks on what he calls the country's victory, by which he means his acquittal on impeachment charges. 2 articles of impeachment yesterday in the Senate. And in the meantime, we are joined here by Rick Davis, our Bloomberg contributor, somebody who's run quite a few political campaigns, including that for John McCain for president in 2008. So when you look at it that way, the way you just described, what does that tell you as a Democrat you would want in your candidate? Who's the one who's most formidable going up against Donald Trump?
I think one that excites the Democratic base, right? You've got to get those voters out. And the Democratic base is very diversified, right? You have urban liberals who are activists in a lot of these places, but you also have minorities in the rural areas. You have a lot of blue-collar workers. And so keeping that coalition together and getting them excited is going to be job number one. Then appealing to disaffected voters in the middle. Some Republicans, but many independents are wavering as to whether or not the Democrats can give me a candidate that I can support, or do I have to be forced into looking at Donald Trump for another 4 years.
So you and I were out in Des Moines and came back with no results on Monday.
It wasn't our fault, David.
I don't think it was. But they're sort of trickling in now. I think, aren't we up above 90%, something
Yes.
like that, get counted? Did we learn anything from that? Does that tell us anything about some of the questions you just were asking? For example, the degree to which some of these candidates could generate some real excitement, passion.
Sure. I mean, pundits were wrong, right? Everybody said it was Bernie Sanders to lose, and technically he lost it. He had, no question, a surge going on the week before the Iowa caucuses. Widely reported how much traction he was making up against Elizabeth Warren and Biden, but nobody was paying that much attention to Mayor Pete. And the reality is the guy who had the biggest surge going on was Pete Buttigieg, but the media didn't cover it. Only one poll that I know of showed him winning Iowa, and that was the morning of the Iowa caucus when it was released. So he surprised everybody with his resiliency, and I would say, look at the results. Buttigieg won all over the state, in every corner of Iowa, the east where the manufacturing is, the west where the agriculture is, the cities in the center. And no Democrat had anywhere near that level of appeal across the spectrum. And that's what I was talking about with what can appeal to Trump, is someone who has that kind of broad-based appeal.
We continue to wait for President Trump to appear at the White House to give what he says is a speech about America's victory in his success in the Senate in the trial. We're talking with Rick Davis here, our Bloomberg contributor. We have New Hampshire coming up now. And I'm very aware of momentum in New Hampshire because one year we got it wrong in the polling. Everybody got it wrong because the momentum was moving. We weren't paying attention. What do we know about New Hampshire right now?
Well, it is a momentum state. And the strange case of Iowa without any real clear outcome and even no outcome at all for 48 hours really changed the dynamic. It's almost like you have to reload the entire Democratic primary and say New Hampshire is going to be the start, not the second one in a series. And New Hampshire is a primary, so it's much more likely to have a lot of participants. And I would say the one thing to watch out for is New Hampshire allows independents to vote. And so some independents, they vote in Republican primaries. We certainly got a lot of support from the McCain campaign by independents. And they can vote in the Democratic primary. And this time, they'll be all voting in the Democratic primary, and they will have an inordinate impact on the outcome.
Vice President Joe Biden didn't do so well in Iowa, by all accounts. How much trouble is he in? And particularly, I've noticed the fundraising right now. We had an announcement that Sanders raised $25 million in 1 month, in the month of January. In the meantime, reportedly, Vice President Biden is pulling back on some of his advertising.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Biden did not do well in Iowa. It was a bad outcome for him, both because it was indecisive and sort of dragged on for more days than it probably would have otherwise, but also he just didn't turn out his vote. Stories are that he didn't have the organization he needed to pull off, a good outcome. New Hampshire is a little bit different. These independents, they tend to be more centrist. They go either way, Republican or Democrat sometime. That should be helpful to Joe Biden. He is in a place now where he's sitting in his campaign headquarters and saying, what do we have to do to show well now in New Hampshire? We cannot afford another bad outcome. And so we're going to see him campaigning hard this week.
Now we are hearing the applause in the East Room of the White House as President Trump is about to emerge and give his address, a real victory lap. It's been quite a week for the president after that State of the Union address, and now he is going to address the results after the acquittal of the president on 2 articles of impeachment in the Senate just yesterday. So the president is about to emerge, we're told. They've put the speech up on the podium for him. They are applauding in anticipation, I believe, of the president arriving. Still has yet to come in. We should be seeing the president any moment now, I believe. We have the cabinet all assembled there, Rick, and we are waiting for those double doors to open and the president to emerge down that long, dramatic hallway. Only about 20 minutes late, Rick.
It's his house. He can show up late if he wants.
Yeah, I guess that's right. We're on his time. He's not on our time. I think that's fair to say.
I'm pretty confident it's not because he isn't sure what he wants to talk about.
There we go. Ruffles and flourishes. The doors have opened, the long, red, carpeted hallway, and we should see the President of the United States. There he is at the end of the hallway, flanked by Marine guards, walking up to the podium for the speech that I'm sure he's been looking forward to give to the American people. The President of the United States.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Wow. We've all been through a lot together, and we probably deserve that hand for all of us because it's been a very unfair situation. I invited some of our very good friends, and we have limited room, but everybody wanted to come. We kept it down to a minimum, and believe it or not, this is a minimum. But a tremendous thing was done over the last number of months, but really, if you go back to it over the last number of years, we had the witch hunt. It started from the day we came down the elevator, myself and our future First Lady, who's with us right now. Thank you, Melania. And it never really stopped. We've been going through this now for over 3 years. It was evil, it was corrupt, it was dirty cops, it was leakers and liars. And this should never, ever happen to another president, ever. I don't know that other presidents would have been able to take it. Some people said no, they wouldn't have. But I can tell you, at a minimum, you have to focus on this because it can get away very quickly. No matter who you have with you, it can get away very quickly. It was a disgrace. Had I not fired James Comey, who was a disaster, by the way, it's possible I wouldn't even be standing here right now. We caught him in the act. Dirty cops, bad people. If this happened to President Obama, a lot of people would have been in jail for a long time already, many, many years. I want to start by thanking some of, and I call them friends, because, you know, you develop friendships and relationships when you're in battle and war, much more so than, gee, let's have a normal situation. With all that we've gone through, we've done, I think, more than any president and administration. And really, I say, for the most part, Republican congressmen, congresswomen, and Republican senators. We've done more than any administration in the first few years. You look at all of the things we've done. I watched this morning as they tried to take credit for the stock market from think of that. Let me tell you, if we didn't win, the stock market would have crashed. And the market was going up a lot before the election because it was looking like we had a good chance to win, and then went up tremendously from the time we won the election till the time we took office, which was November 8th to January 20th. And that's our credit. That's all our credit. And leading up to that point was our credit because there was hope. And one of the reasons the stock market's gone up so much in the last few days is people think we're doing so well. They liked the State of the Union speech. It really is. It's a true honor to give it. Making the State of the Union speech, I was with some people that have been around. They've been all over the world. And one of them said, highly sophisticated person said, you know, no matter where you go in the world, it doesn't make any difference. There is nothing like what I witnessed tonight. The beauty, the majesty of the chamber, the power of the United States, the power of the people in this room. Really an amazing, even I don't think there is anything like that anywhere in the world. You can go to any other country, you can go to any other location, any other place. It's the beauty of everything. It's what it represents and how it represents our country. I want to start by introducing some of the people that are here. I know some are going to be left out, but they work so hard. And this is really not a news conference. It's not a speech. It's not anything. It's just we're sort of, it's a celebration because we have something that just worked out. I mean, it worked out. We went through hell unfairly, did nothing wrong. Did nothing wrong. I've done things wrong in my life, I will admit. Not purposely, but I've done things wrong. but this is what the end result is. So you can take that home, honey. Maybe we'll frame it. It's the only good headline I've ever had in the Washington Post. I tell you. But every paper is the same. Does anybody have those papers? Does anybody have them? Because they're really like that, so I appreciate that. But some of the people here have been incredible warriors. They're warriors. And there's nothing from a legal standpoint. This is a political thing. And every time I'd say, this is unfair, let's go to court, they say, sir, you can't go to court. This is politics. And we were treated unbelievably unfairly. And you have to understand, we first went through Russia. It was all bullshit. We then went through the Mueller report. And they should have come back one day later. They didn't. They came back 2 years later, after lives were ruined, after people went bankrupt, after people lost all their money. People came to Washington to help other people. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, they say. They came, 1 or 2 or 3 people in particular, but many people. We had a rough campaign. It was nasty. It was one of the nastiest, they say. They say Andrew Jackson was always the nastiest campaign. They actually said we topped it. It was a nasty both in the primaries and in the election. But you see, we thought after the election it would stop, but it didn't stop. It just started. And tremendous corruption. So we had a campaign. Little did we know we were running against some very, very bad and evil people with fake dossiers, with all of these horrible, dirty cops that took these dossiers and did bad things. They knew all about it. The FISA courts should be ashamed of themselves. It's a very tough thing. And then we ended up winning on Russia. It should have taken the one day, as I said, and it took years. Then Bob Mueller testified. That didn't work out so well for the other side. But they should have said that first week, because it came out. Is that right, Jim Jordan? They knew in the first 2 days, actually. Devin, is that right? 2 days, they knew that we were totally innocent. But they kept it going, Mark. They kept it going forever. Because they wanted to inflict political pain on somebody that had just won an election that to a lot of people was surprised. I mean, we had polls that said we were going to win. We had Los Angeles Times, and a few papers actually said we were going to win, but it was going to be close. And we did win. It was one of the greatest wins of all time. And they said, okay, he won. And, I wrote this down because that was where a thing called the insurance policy, to me, when I saw the insurance policy, and that was done long before the election. That was done when they thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win. And by the way, Hillary Clinton and the DNC paid for millions of dollars, the fake dossier. And now Christopher Steele admits that it's a fake because he got sued by rich people. I should have sued him too, but when you're president, people don't like suing. I want to thank my legal team, by the way, not for that advice, but for other advice. Pat, Jay, Pat, you guys stand up, please. Great job. Right at the beginning, they said, sir, you have nothing to worry about. All of the facts are on your side. I said, you don't understand. that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. And that was really true. They made up facts. A corrupt politician named Adam Schiff made up my statement to the Ukrainian president. He brought it out of thin air, just made it up. They say he's a screenwriter, a failed screenwriter. He tried to go into, unfortunately, he went into politics after that. Remember, he said the statement, which is a mob statement, "Don't call me, I'll call you." I didn't say that. Fortunately, for all of us here today and for our country, we had transcripts. We had transcribers, professional transcribers. Then they said, oh, well, maybe the transcription is not correct. But Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and his twin brother, right? We had some people that really amazing. But we did everything. We said, what's wrong with it? Well, they didn't add this word or that. It didn't matter. I said, add it. They're probably wrong, but add it. So now everyone agrees that they were perfectly accurate. When you read those transcripts, Tim Scott, I don't know if Tim's here, but he said, sir, he's the first one to call me. Sir, I read the transcript. You did nothing wrong. And Mitch, he stayed there right from the beginning. He never changed. And Mitch McConnell, I want to tell you, you did a fantastic job. Somebody said, you know, Mitch is quiet. And I said, he's not quiet. He's not quiet. He doesn't want people to know him. And they said, is Mitch smart? I said, well, let's put it this way. For many, many years, a lot of very smart, bad in many cases, sometimes good, but people have been trying to take his place. And to the best of my knowledge, I've never even heard the subject come up because they've been wiped out so fast. This guy is great, and I appreciate it, Mitch. And he's also given us 191 now. 191 federal judges, 2 Supreme Court judges, right? We're up to 191. Yeah. Great guy. Great guy. He's a tough guy to read. I'm good at reading people. Tough guy to read, I'd call him. My wife would say, how'd you do with Mitch? I don't know. That's what makes him good, when you can read somebody. Fantastic job. And he understood right from the, this was crooked politics. This was crooked politics. How about all these people? They're running for office. They're saying the worst things about me, like 8 senators on the Democrat side. Most of them got wiped out. You know, they got their 1% or less. Most of them got less. They decided to go home. Let's go back to California. Let's go back to wherever they came from. Let's go back to New York. How about that one? Our New York Senator, Gillibrand. Let's go back to New York after they get nothing. And then they take an oath that they will be fair, that they will be reasonable, you know, all of the different things, and they had a sign. They're not fair, but here's the beauty. So we have 4 left. They're saying the most horrendous things about me. It's okay, it's politics. And then they're supposed to vote on me. They're trying to replace me, and then they're supposed to be voting. So I think it's incredible. But so Mitch, I want to thank you very much, incredible. And you have some of your folks here. And they're incredible people, and they've been right from the beginning. And again, you're out of session. Unfortunately, I only told these folks, let's do this today. We did a prayer breakfast this morning, and I thought that was really good. In fact, that was so good it might wipe this out. But by the time we finish, this will wipe that one out, those statements. I had Nancy Pelosi sitting 4 seats away, and I'm saying things that a lot of people wouldn't have said, but I meant every word of it. But we have some of the folks that are going to be leaving right after this, and they work hard, and they did work hard. Bill Cassidy, Senator. Stand up, Bill. What a guy. Great man. When I need to know about health insurance and pre-existing conditions and individual mandates, I call Bill or I call Barrasso. We get those two guys, they know more than anybody. A man who just became a senator. He's a little bit like me. We have a couple of them. Very successful guy in business, and he said, what the hell? I'll run for the Senate from Indiana. And he ran, and I saw him on television destroying his opponent in a debate. I said, you know, this guy could win, and I got behind him. And Mike Braun, you have done some great job. Thank you very much. Tough. Tough. Thank you. A man who got James Comey to choke, and he was just talking in his regular voice. He's the roughest man. He's actually unbelievable, and I appreciate the letter you sent me today. I just got it. But he's got this voice that scares people. You know, people from Iowa can be very tough. We're doing very well in Iowa. But I'll tell you, Chuck Grassley, he's looking at Comey. Well, you tell me, what did you say? Now, he wasn't being rough. That was just the way he talked. And that was when Comey, I think that was when Comey announced that he was leaking, lying, and everything else, right? He choked because he never heard anybody talk like that. You know, you should have gone, I wish you got angry. You could have gotten the whole ball game. He would have said, I give up. Chuck Grassley is an incredible guy. And a man who, you know, he was running against a tough, smart campaigner. We learned out how good she was, right? She was a great campaigner. In fact, by the end of the campaign, she was actually, I thought she was more for me than you were, Josh. I was worried. I saw her ads. She was saying the greatest things about me. And you know who I'm talking about? And I went to a great place, Missouri, and I said, who do you have to beat her? And they said, well, we have 4 people. I said, let me see them. I got to interview people. Can you imagine? I'm interviewing people for the United States Senate. This is what I do. Where have I gone? But I love it. I love it because we're getting great people. The first one I met was Josh Hawley. After about 10 minutes, I said to the people, don't show me anybody else. This is the guy. He was the Attorney General, did a phenomenal job in the state, highly respected. And Claire McCaskill. So the theory was you couldn't beat her. Great campaigner. Remember the last campaign? She was going to be taken. She was always going to be taken out, and she wins. And people say, how did that happen? Didn't happen with him. But she got so friendly toward me. In fact, one of the ads I still have, I'm putting it in the archives as one of the best ads I've ever made. And she tried to convince people that we were best friends. But Josh ended up winning by 5 or 6 points. You were unbelievable. You were tough. And you are something. And one of the greatest supporters on the impeachment hoax was Josh.
We have been listening to President Donald Trump speaking from the East Room in the White House. He continues to speak. This is a speech that he scheduled after his acquittal in the Senate yesterday. It was a wide-ranging speech, I think it's fair to say, starting back to when he came down the escalator with Melania Trump when he announced he first ran for president. He said that people were after him from the beginning and right through. He described it as corrupt, what was done to him. It was evil and involved dirty cops. He also took a shot or two at Mr. Comey. He said that if Mr. Comey had not been fired, probably President Trump would no longer be president, is what he said. I wouldn't be standing here any longer. He also talked about Bob Mueller in a disparaging way, but basically said, we have been vindicated, they have been evil, they've been corrupt on the other side, and essentially justice has triumphed. So, Rick, as I say, it's a fairly wide-ranging speech. Unlike the State of the Union, it doesn't seem like he's on the teleprompter. This is sort of unplugged, as it were.
Yeah, it's a little stream of consciousness, thanking people in the audience, taking shots at his foes, both in his own administration and outside. Now he's going through congressional races that he weighed into, you know, back in 18. It's not totally clear what he's trying to accomplish other than sort of have a fun time and take a victory lap on his impeachment.
Yeah, well, we'll continue to monitor this, and if there's news being made, we'll bring it to you. But in the meantime, there was other news that broke while we were listening to President Trump, and it is Tom Perez, the head of the Democratic National Committee, has now tweeted out that he wants a recanvass in Iowa. I'm not sure exactly what that means. They're still counting, I think, in recounting. But he now says, let's go back to scratch because there's enough questions about it. What do you make of that?
Well, it would be a disaster if they actually went back and relitigated the Iowa caucus. Let's chalk it up to a failed attempt at democracy in Iowa, and the candidates themselves, the last thing they're going to want to do is go spend one more day in Iowa. So Perez, I don't know, maybe he's a secret weapon for Donald Trump in the Democratic Party, but if there's anything that he should be doing is resigning from his post as chairman of the DNC. His rules were what put into effect some of the spiraling out of control caucuses that we witnessed.
So this is an important point. People tend to blame the Iowa Democratic Party. It wasn't just them that came up with these rules and this approach.
Well, the way the Democratic Party works is the national party sets the rules of delegate selection in states, all states. And so every single rule that was applied to these caucuses in Iowa that were all brand new this cycle were approved of and promoted by Chairman Perez. So maybe this is his way of, shirking culpability. But if I were a Democrat running for president right now, my response to his suggestion to relitigate the Iowa caucuses is maybe you should go and clean up your mess there and then resign from chairmanship.
Okay, thank you so much to Rick Davis, our Bloomberg contributor. We'll continue to monitor the president's remarks as they occur. Rick Davis, I'm happy to say, will be with us in New Hampshire for coverage of the primary that's coming up next Tuesday. Meanwhile, in other news, the city of Wuhan is telling residents to begin reporting their body temperature daily as the death toll from the coronavirus continues to rise, with over 500 people dead and over 26,000 cases in mainland China. Welcome now Dr. Jennifer Nuzzo. She is senior scholar and associate professor at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security in Baltimore. So, Doctor, thank you for being back with us. Really appreciate it. Give us your take right now on where this viral epidemic stands.
Well, we continue to see a steep climb in cases every day. Those are the reported cases. It's not necessarily the days that the cases occurred. But with this continued increase, despite very aggressive measures being taken in China and now outside of China, I think we really have to ask the question, is it going to be possible to contain this virus, or is this going to be something that circulates similar to, a pandemic influenza?
Well, let's talk about that, Doctor, because obviously for those of us particularly who are not doctors and don't know the science, we can overreact. I suppose we can underreact as well. One of the things I heard today was actually the lethality rate, the mortality rate for coronavirus right now roughly tracks that of the Spanish influenza back in the early part of the 20th century. Now, obviously, that was a very different situation. It was much more broadly based around the world. But is that true?
Yeah, so if you just took the number of cases and the number of deaths and you divided the deaths into the cases, you would get that 2%. But it's not really an accurate way to look at lethality because it's possible that there are many, many more cases out there that we're just not counting, particularly mild cases. So my best guess is that the mortality is actually lower and perhaps much lower than that 2%. When I brought up the pandemic influenza, I just want to say that when we talk about pandemics, we do so with respect to geography. So meaning that the virus is capable of spreading around the globe, and that's not necessarily an indication of its severity. I know the word pandemic can sound scary, but really when we talk about it in the epidemiologic sense, it's about how quickly it's spreading and where it's spreading.
So from your point of view, are the authorities both in China and the United States doing what ought to be done? Are they doing what they can do at this point?
Well, I think that you've seen a lot of aggressive measures being taken, and yet still the virus continues to circulate. And for me, that's not entirely surprising because respiratory viruses like this do spread very quickly. And I think it's time for us to reconsider what our approach is going to be and examine whether it's going to be possible to fully stop the spread of this. We also have to consider how disruptive these measures are. You mentioned that the city of Wuhan is going to be measuring everybody's body temperature. I don't even know how they'll be able to act on those data. People have fevers for all sorts of things. I think at some point we have to re-examine our approach. And in my view, I think we're going to have to shift from these very drastic efforts that don't seem to be helping, I think in many ways are probably hurting, and shift to a situation where we're focused on just reducing the spread and protecting those people who are most at risk of becoming severely ill and dying. And although we see the large numbers of deaths being reported, and that's a concern, we also have to examine that the majority of the deaths so far seem to be in people who have some underlying health condition or are otherwise known to be at risk for severe complications with a respiratory viral infection.
We're talking with Dr. Jennifer Nuzzo of Johns Hopkins. Doctor, I've seen some reporting that suggests that the incidence of these epidemics, if not pandemics, is increasing. They're coming up with increasing frequency. We all remember SARS, but we've also had a number of others. Is that true? And if so, what's causing that?
Yes, it is true. There have been some studies that have looked at these emerging infectious disease events, and those are pathogens that we haven't recognized before, and that they go on to cause outbreaks, and then if they're not contained, epidemics. And there does seem to be a clear line that they are increasing. Clearly, surveillance for these events has gotten better, but some studies that have looked at this, even when they kind of try to adjust for increases in surveillance, still see that there's an increase. And I think there are a number of important drivers of this. One is that we are a very populous globe, and we are a very connected globe. And so now you can get on a plane and be anywhere in the world in 36 hours, and that wasn't always the case. We're also a globe that is changing our environment in ways that favor the emergence and spread of viruses. So deforestation happening in many countries, allowing people to encounter wildlife populations that they didn't encounter before. Climate is changing and likely moving pathogens into places they hadn't been before. So there are a lot of environmental factors as well that can favor the emergence of these viruses. And when you layer that on top of the fact that we're very interconnected, that there's mass displacement in the world, so people are moving in ways that they haven't moved before, that all creates the condition for not only the emergence of new virus, but the rapid spread of them.
Okay, Doctor, thank you so very much for your patience as well as for your time today. Really appreciate it. That's Dr. Jennifer Nuzzo of Johns Hopkins. And we need to note that the Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg. He is founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. And now let's stay with China, but this time talking about trade. There's news today that China will cut in half its tariffs on $75 billion of U.S. imports as of February 14. That is part of its Phase 1 trade agreement with the United States. Something that President Trump touted as a step forward in his State of the Union address on Tuesday. So this is something that had been expected, widely expected. I guess the good news here is that China will go forward despite the problems that they're having with the coronavirus and the spread of it. They will go forward and comply with what they promised under the Phase 1 agreement. Surprisingly, actually, for some at least, the equity markets in the United States and around the world reacted positively to this news about the trade from China, apparently saying this is a good thing, maybe we'll get growth going despite what's going on the coronavirus. And I think it's fair to say, actually, if you look at equity markets, although they did take a big hit, of course, initially from the coronavirus, they seem to be rebounding. There seems to be an assumption that it is contained and it will not last too long. On the other hand, the bond markets have also been selling off, but now they are coming back. And we welcome now an authority on global trade. He is Pascal Lamy. He served for 2 terms as Director General of the World Trade Organization after leading the trade policy for the European Union as its Commissioner for Trade. And he comes to us today from Brussels. So, Mr. Lamy, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Let's start with the U.S.-China relationship. As I say, the China says they're going to cut their tariffs, which is a step forward. The President Trump has really pursued a bilateral approach to trade. It almost has replaced what we had since World War II. How do you assess the effectiveness of President Trump in the trade arena?
Well, I mean, as a trade expert, and not on a political ground, my own view, for what it's worth, is that Trump's trade policy do not work. Imposing tariffs on imports, which is what he believes he should do in order to reduce the U.S. trade deficit, which he believes is the problem, is all wrong. A, because the U.S. trade deficit is not the problem. When you have the dollar as a currency, you don't have a problem with your trade deficit. And second, because this will not reduce the U.S. trade deficit, especially if he imposes tariffs on China. What is produced in China and imported by the U.S. will be produced elsewhere, mostly outside the U.S., and the price for tariffs will be paid, is being paid by U.S. consumers, and this is a negative development for the U.S. economy. So overall, I don't think it works. I think it's already showing that it doesn't work, and the fact that China has given a $200 billion present to President Trump for his re-election campaign will not change that.
Staying with China for a moment, Mr. Lamy, how do you assess the possible effects on global trade of the coronavirus?
I mean, there's one thing on where I agree with Trump on trade, which is that the rules of international trade, the disciplines of the World Trade Organization, do not discipline enough a number of Chinese practices, and especially on subsidization. The Chinese have too wide a margin of maneuver within existing disciplines of the WTO to subsidize production, hence gain an unfair comparative advantage when you compete with them. So on this, I think there is a good US point, which, by the way, is also a point made by the EU or by Japan, that World Trade Organization needs to be reformed in order to adjust to the size and the behavior of China today. This is why the solution is in a reinforcement, in a renegotiation, in an improvement of WTO disciplines, and not in bilateral tariff wars.
We are talking with Pascal Lamy. He's former Director General of the World Trade Organization. Let's stay on the subject of the WTO, which you led for some good long time. President Trump is insisting on reforms to the WTO and has made various threats, I think I can call it, if they don't reform. Does he have a point that there is reform that is required?
As I just said, I think the US have a point, and President Trump has a point in saying that the WTO needs reform. Remember last time we tried to reform WTO, and I was the WTO DG at the time. We had a big negotiation with a WTO reform agenda, and the ones that froze this negotiation about WTO reform, including on subsidies at the time, were the United States of America, which shows that it's easier said than done, that WTO needs reform. I agree with that. Getting there will need many countries to make more concessions in order to have wider disciplines, including probably the US. Of course China, of course Europe, of course India, but also the US, notably on the subsidization of farming.
And we're talking with Pascal Lamy. He's former Director General of the WTO. Let me talk about one specific issue, Mr. Lamy, that has come to light here in the United States, which is the government purchasing agreement, which has been in effect since the 70s, I believe. It is a plurilateral agreement, as I understand it. It does not include all WTO members. The United States has been a member since the 70s. There are reports the administration is considering pulling the United States out of that, so it would no longer exempt people from the Buy America Act. What would be the effects of that?
Well, as you rightly said, there is an agreement within the WTO, which is only among some members of WTO, roughly developing countries, EU, Japan, Canada, Australia, US, which opens on a reciprocity basis public procurement. I open my public procurement market in a certain proportion, and you open your public procurement market in a certain proportion. We have to negotiate to make sure the proportion is right. And when it is right, we do the deal. This is a deal that was done between the US and other countries. The country that pulls out from this government procurement loses access to the government procurement market of the other members of this club. So it's a club. You're a member of the club, you have to open your public procurement, and you benefit from the public procurement opening of others. You leave the club, you lose the market access you've negotiated.
Okay, thank you so much to Pascal Lamy. He's former Director General of the World Trade Organization. We're going to have more with Mr. Lamy coming up in our second hour on Bloomberg Radio. And in the meantime, President Trump is still speaking at the East Wing of the White House after being acquitted in the impeachment trial. He's covered a wide range of subjects, I think it's fair to say. You can catch those remarks on the Bloomberg at the Function Live Go. And now a programming note. On Tuesday, we'll have live coverage of the New Hampshire primary. That will be starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And we will continue to monitor President Trump at the White House, and as and if he brings us news, we will report that to you. And I think it's fair to say he's evening a lot of scores. That does it for Balance of Power on television today. This is David Weston. Thank you for joining us, and this is Bloomberg.
And they say where he works out, you know, with the congressmen, senators, they work out. They say when Jim works out, even though he's not as young as he was, but he works out, the machine starts.